How's it going, everybody? And welcome back to another edition of the Stupid Questions podcast. Today on the pod, going to be talking with Robert Swan. He is a professional triathlete from the Atlanta, Georgia area. I know him and his wife well from living in that Chattanooga area. Have got to race in the same race as them a few times and got to spectate as well. But Robert's a great guy, a new pro as of in the past couple of years, has a pretty cool story, has been through some stuff, and is just an all-around fun stand-up guy. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Robert Swan. How you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Just, I think kind of waiting for the anticipation of the season to kick off and settling into married life now. And so, not a whole lot's changed, I think, since the last time I saw you. Just still kind of doing the swim, bike, run thing and
Yeah.
coaching a little bit and doing some bike fits. And so it's a lot of triathlon all the time.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. Yeah, and getting married, like that was, how long have you been married now?
Shoot. So we got married at the very end of November. So it's been like 3 months.
Nice. Do you have any marriage wisdom to bestow upon all of us?
It's funny. I don't. We got married and we woke up the next day and we're like, it doesn't feel that much different. And I think for us, that was like kind of this awesome sign of like, okay, we made the right decision.
Yeah.
And I mean, we had been together for almost 5 years by the time we got married.
Yeah.
So we'd been living together for 4 of those years.
Yeah.
So we kind of knew we were each other's person for a while. But I mean, for us, we're best friends, and so
Yeah.
we do pretty much everything together, including as much swim, bike, and run as we can.
Mm-hmm.
And then we like each other's company, and so that's hang out with your partner.
Yeah, yeah. So I can name like a few things for sure, like on my end that were like real signs to me, like, oh, like my wife, this is the one because of these things. What are some of those things that stand out to you for the reason that you decided like Devin's one for me?
Honestly, our humor is very similar, and so when we're together, and obviously there's time for serious stuff, and we have
Mm-hmm.
those real conversations, but for the most part, like we just have fun together. And so when I was like, oh, I'm having more fun with her than without her, that's was like kind of that first telltale sign of like, oh, maybe there's more to this.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of kept developing. And we had the fortunate or unfortunate experience of just starting to date like as the onset of COVID hit. And so like
Mm,
we quickly found we're like, oh, like you're going to be in my tribe as we started doing that distancing thing right at the beginning. And we just kind of kept it. And so for us, it was just truly enjoying the time spent together, was kind of all we needed to know. And then we started getting hit with like the real world things and we
mm-hmm.
figured out that we could solve problems together. And so I think that was like the next big, like, okay, like, yeah, we can laugh and we enjoy each other's company. But like when shit hits the fan, like I know I've got someone I've got to rock, and I think it goes both ways, and she knows like she can depend on me and I can depend on her. And so it became this partnership and truly this thing where we make each other better. And so that was kind of that final thing of like I'm better with her than without her, and
Mm,
and so then we made it official.
mm. Yeah, dude. Thanks for sharing. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, not I think some people can jump into things a little bit too quickly, and then after a while you start to really get to know someone. You're like, oh shoot, like this isn't the one that I thought it was. So I'm
Yeah.
really happy for you guys that you're able to figure that out. But when did you, like you said, sorry, not when, but during COVID you guys met, but how did you guys meet?
So we met at the pool.
Okay.
Um,
It seems to
and
be a
we
common
had,
thing.
yeah, so we were 5 years, 6 years ago. I would have just started training for like my first ever Ironman, and I think
Mm-hmm.
she had just completed her first Ironman. And we were swimming at kind of the pool in Atlanta that a lot of triathletes swim at, and there's a big masters program that was out of there, and so we would both
Nice.
show up in the morning and swim in separate lanes, but kind of knew each other, and we were friendly, but didn't talk a ton. And then one day we saw each other out at a bar, and the rest was history. And, we just ended up kind of talking all night and went on a date kind of that next week. And I think we went on 2 dates, and then COVID officially kind of shut everything down.
Mm-hmm.
which again for us kind of jump started it because it was like, hey, you're the only person like, we're gonna kind of hang out with, and
Yeah.
so it accelerated things quickly for us, and it was kind of the greatest thing ever. And so I found someone I liked, but also someone I could train with at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool, man. So my first question that I kind of want to open up into, and then I'm probably going to ask some more relationship stuff later, just
Go
because
for it.
I think it's fun. But if you were to introduce yourself to someone in the third person, like who would you say that Robert is?
That's so funny because I was trying to think of an answer to this question like an hour ago
Yeah.
and was coming up with nothing. So I will try my very best.
Yeah.
Who am I? I am an Atlanta-based triathlete who kind of does stuff in all things triathlon. So I do triathlon myself. I'll be starting my second season as a professional, which is exciting. And then, like I kind of mentioned, my wife and I, we run a triathlon community team, coaching collective, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
That's mostly Atlanta-based triathletes, although we do have remote athletes. And so we started that together a couple years ago. And then to kind of round it all off, I work in a bike shop as well, kind of doing bike fits and high-end bike sales. So, I spend a lot of time in kind of the endurance community. And so I think that's kind of who I am right now. That's not always who I've been.
Mm-hmm.
I think that for me, that's, I've gone through these phases in life. And so who I am has changed a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm just kind of a dude based in Atlanta doing triathlon right now.
Yeah. So what are some of those past seasons or those past versions of Robert that kind of come to mind that you've been through?
Yeah. I mean, so like, I say I've changed. I've always kind of done endurance sport, I guess. I grew up swimming, and did that through high school at a pretty high level. And so there was kind of, the swimmer life of Robert, who was, pretty dedicated swimmer from like, call it 10 years old until 18.
Yeah, that's a long time.
Um, yeah, it was a long time, and it was, I kind of jumped right into it and started with year-round swimming, around that age. And the only reason I started that was because my sister was swimming, and I was tired of having to go to the swim meets and sit around all day. So I didn't really even join swimming out of an interest, but more of, hey, I don't want to be bored.
Okay.
And so that was my first kind of foray into endurance sport, and that was kind of that formative high school years of life. Then I went to college, and went the complete opposite way and went the partying route, and got a degree from the business school, and went to a big SEC school. Did the football thing, did the weekends, and had a great time.
As a spectator?
As a spectator, I was,
Okay.
yeah, you don't hand-eye coordination to me or not
Yeah.
too familiar with each other. So yeah, no, I was definitely that. I'll say regular and not in a bad way, but I just didn't have a ton of extracurriculars that didn't involve going to the bar in college.
Were those
And
good times or do you
great times.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah. I have no regrets about not pursuing swimming in college or continuing down that path. And at 18 years old, you think you figured out the world, and you realize you're still kind of just a dumb kid.
Mm.
But I had figured out that it was time for at least a break from endurance sport in my life. And I had that. I mean, I swam my last high school meet, call it like April of senior year, and I didn't get in a pool for 8 years.
Wow, that's a long time.
Didn't even get in to do a 500, coming from swimming, call it 50 or 60,000 yards a week. To yeah, I mean, literally not touching the water. I really wouldn't even get in. I'd go to the pool a lot in college and sit around it, but I wouldn't get in the water much.
Mhm.
And so there was, that, and a couple years after school, working kind of first couple jobs out of college, and still living that lifestyle, and moved to Atlanta with a bunch of my buddies, and still having a good time. And then kind of the most recent phase, endurance sport kind of nudged its way back into my life when I was probably 23 or 24. I'd been out of college for a couple of years. And by that point, I was 240 pounds, and not a muscular 240, but a drinking 240.
Yeah, you're pretty tall though, aren't you? You're like what,
I-
6?
Yeah, I mean, everyone thinks I'm way taller because I've got these abnormally long legs, but I'm like 6'2".
Well, I'm
Um,
5'5", so yeah. You're very tall to me.
Fair enough, fair
Yeah,
enough. So I'm a solid 6'2".
yeah,
But 240 pounds at 6'2", and again not a healthy 240.
yeah.
And so it was time to kind of make some changes in life,
Mm.
and so I started running. And it just kind of was one of those things where I was like, I used to do this a little bit, like let me go out and try this. And
Hmm.
I'm one of those people that kind of just goes all in. I think it's just kind of how I work, and so I started running one day. I was like, well, maybe I can run a little bit further the next day. And I was like, well, maybe I can run a little bit further than that. And kind of before I knew it, I had signed up for a marathon and enter the second endurance phase of my life.
Mm.
And that kind of started with running. And before I knew it, I had lost, call it 70 pounds. I was,
Wow.
kind of back down to fighting weight, and
Hmm.
I ran a marathon, and then someone told me I should sign up for an ultra marathon. So I signed up and did a 50-mile run.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, that's pretty cool. I was like, I wonder what's next.
Mm.
And, I had a buddy who, again, was from my partying phase of life and who knew nothing about endurance sport. And he goes, well, why don't you do an Ironman? And so I said, screw it, I'm going to do an Ironman. So I went and bought a road bike and signed up for Lake Placid, and then entered the triathlon phase of my
So
life.
your first ever triathlon was a full Ironman.
It was, yeah, yeah. So
Holy
I
cow.
bought a bike in January and did Lake Placid in July. Um,
Wow.
and that was my start to triathlon as an adult. I think technically I did a super duper sprint when I was like 8 years old.
Sure.
The kind of the local pool and in the neighborhood, but no, had never competed really in triathlon. Always was a swimmer, and then became an Ironman in 2019,
Wow.
and that's kind of what kicked it all off.
What was it like touching the water for the first time after several years?
Very foreign.
Really?
Um, yeah, so it's funny because it is kind of like riding a bike in the sense that you don't forget how to do it.
Hmm.
Um, but like there is no fitness. And you go back to like, okay, hey, I used to do this as a kid, and now I'm making connections onto why I would do drills and why I would do certain things in the water. I was like, oh, because it overemphasizes this part of the stroke, and I'm dropping my elbow right now, and so I could recognize like the deficiencies in my stroke pretty quick.
Mm.
But it's still just nothing felt natural. And so I started kind of swimming on my own, and then had kind of quickly found the pool I was swimming at had a master's program. And so that's kind of really what um,
Pulled you back
got me
into it, huh?
back into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I was fortunate enough that master's program had a very good coach at the time and just a really good group of people.
Mm.
They were probably averaging 50 or 60 people a morning at a practice,
Wow, that's
which,
huge. That must be a
yeah,
huge pool.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a 50-meter competition pool, and
Okay.
so it's it was a nice facility for swimming at, and it just had all the right people and all the right things, and so it was, I think, a healthy way to reintroduce swimming back into my life. Kind of,
Social
when I
and
had left, not that I left on a bad note, but I was definitely ready to be done swimming.
mm.
And so it kind of became this social thing that I get to do and not something I have to do.
Yeah. Was this a 5 a.m. masters group?
Close was 5:45, but most
Yeah.
people are getting in at 5:30.
Yeah. Phew.
So yeah, brought me back to those days because I forgot about waking up and getting in a cold pool in the morning.
Yeah, that first jump in is always what you're regretting.
Yeah, and I'm such a baby when it comes to that.
Same.
So
Yeah.
I still even to this day, will dip my toe in the water and back up and go, maybe I should get in the hot tub.
Yeah. That's hilarious. So going back to Robert prior to Atlanta, like where were you at before then? What was home or where was
So
home?
I grew up in Dallas or the suburbs of Dallas, so
Okay.
McKinney, Texas.
Okay. That's where you grew
Um,
up as a kid?
I grew up as a kid in McKinney and was there through high school, and swam at the local club team and swam for McKinney High School.
Okay.
And then went to Alabama. So I was in Tuscaloosa for 4 years, which
Stayed in the
was
South.
yes, yeah, stayed in the South, but was a big transition. No one from my high school went to Alabama that year, and so my parents kind of just dropped me off a couple states away and said have fun, and then kind of learned a lot about myself, and really kind of dove into the college thing.
Mm,
Uh, and I was only in Tuscaloosa for 4 years, and then came straight over to Atlanta right after.
mm.
So I've been in Atlanta like 10 years now.
Wow, yeah, so that's definitely home. So when you say like you started to learn some things about yourself, so for me, the things that really stuck out to like I don't know, that are imprinted on my mind that I started to reach a level of maturity were typically like some type of a pattern recognition, like in the way that I think, or, having this little voice and say, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that. And most of the times then I would go do it. And then when you get a little older, you're like, oh, maybe I won't do that, or I'll consider it a little bit further before I make action. So for you, what were the things that kind of gave you that, I guess, process and confirmation, like, okay, I'm figuring myself out. I'm growing up a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny because looking back, I learned a lot about myself, but I also really didn't change my ways. I just learned that if I don't put structure in place, there won't be structure.
Okay.
And so, for a couple of semesters of college, it was like, all right, what's the bare minimum I can do and still
Yeah.
get by? And then quickly realized that that doesn't translate to getting jobs out of school and
Mm,
setting yourself up for the future and realizing how much you're paying for this. So like maybe don't do the bare minimum. But it wasn't until I kind of, you know, fell a couple times and realized like, okay, like, no one's here to save you. And so it was like, if I don't put the structure in, it's not going to come. And so I think that's now looking at like why I like endurance sport is because there's inherently a ton of structure.
hmm
And so that was probably my biggest thing. I also learned I'm pretty good at procrastinating, which isn't helpful because I still am a last minute to do kind of things.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. So for swimming when you were younger, like you said, it was your sister, correct?
correct.
And
Yeah, older sister.
older sister. So is it just you two?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
She's 3 years older than me.
Okay. What does she do now?
Oh, she's an actuary. She still lives in Texas, so she crunches numbers all day.
Nice.
Um, but it was funny. She actually texted me the other day, and she was like, "I got back in the pool," and I was like, "That's awesome." I mean, she probably has been out of the pool just as long as I had been. And so I don't know if it's gonna stick with her or not, but she definitely got back in and tried recently.
Yeah. With swimming, was it something that kind of ran through the family genes? Did your mom and dad swim as well?
Not at all. My mom won't even put her head in the water.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, like she probably could swim to save herself, but she is not a swimmer at all. My dad is not a swimmer. My parents really were not athletic, which I think was like growing up kind of nice because they didn't maybe realize that there was sometimes they could have pushed me more.
Hmm.
And I was just cruising on easy street. Um, but they were always super encouraging of it, even though it was a bit foreign to them.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely always had the support of the parents growing up and kind of anything I wanted to do, but they didn't come from like a hey, he was a D1 basketball player or some track star or, sports were not a big part of their upbringing. But for whatever reason, I think mostly to keep us busy, they picked the most time intensive sport possible and put us in it. So
Hmm.
good on them.
Yeah, yeah, good for them. And it'll be interesting to see, like, what do you plan on having kids?
Yeah, I think we want one.
Yeah.
But we're probably a couple years away from that still.
Oh yeah, sure. Just got married.
Yeah, I mean, Dev and I get around kids all the time. We're like, that was really awesome, but selfishly, we like our us time,
Yeah.
and that goes away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Having seen both my sister and her kids and Dev's brother, they have a kid, and so we now are around it all the time, which is really
Yeah.
cool.
Aunts and
But it's
uncles.
also made us realize we still have a sport that takes a ton of time, and we want to devote some of that time still to it. So,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, especially while you're still young. And you got to, how old are you?
oh shoot, you say young? I'm like 31.
Okay. Well, we're about the same age. Yeah, when I got married a bit younger. I was like 25.
You did get
Yeah.
married young.
Yeah, which is funny because in my circles that can is like I got married old, just
Yeah.
in like the circles that we were in. So it's kind of funny. But yeah, I totally can relate because we were on the 5 year plan, and then the 5 year plan turned into a 7 year plan. We don't have kids yet, but this next year or this year is going to be the year I think we're
Is
like,
it?
okay, yeah, I think so. Like come June, that's the way we planned it out. My wife started a fellowship program for nurse practitioners, and we wanted to get her through basically a year of that. That's a 2 year thing, and then we'll probably start having kids, take the little whatever you call that, maternity leave, sabbatical, whatever, and
Yep.
then start raising a kid, and then she'll finish up. So
That's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
So are
Yeah,
you thinking more than one then?
most people think I'm crazy, and everyone who has kids tells me that this is not what I want. But I'm pretty set that I would love to have twins or triplets and just kind of be a one and done thing. I
Good for
when
you.
Yeah, just like bring it all in one big package and just make it happen. I know it would be crazy because I see my sister. She has one kid pregnant with his second, and it's like completely turned their lives upside down. And we have other family members who have had kids, obviously, and it does look like a ton of work, but I don't know. I just feel like if I had three kids running around the same age, like when they're like 8 to 15, like that's the ages I really look forward to. Just the high energy. Dad, let's go do whatever. I look forward to that. So I don't know.
Never a dull moment if you have triplets.
Yeah, seriously, triplets might be a bit much. My poor wife, she's also 5'4", so it'd be
Whoa.
definitely a C-section situation. But yeah, so we'll see what happens. So who are you more like, do you think? Your mom or your dad?
Oh, uh, probably my dad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably more like my dad, but take notes from my mom. I mean, I can be. My dad's probably more the type A personality, go and light up a room. My mom's a little bit more reserved. And so I think it depends on the situation because if it's like people are talking about stuff I'm curious about, then like yeah, I'll hold a conversation and we'll be a little bit more energetic. And then when it's like, oh, we're in a room and we're talking about something I know nothing about, like, I'm cool to listen.
Yeah.
And so, probably a bit more like my dad though.
Yeah.
I get passionate about a lot of stuff.
Yeah. What are you most passionate about right now? What's been on your brain lately?
That's a good question.
It can be something that
A lot
fires
of,
you
well,
up. Yeah.
lately it's been a lot of figuring out um how to grow the sport of triathlon as a whole.
Hmm.
That is I think now for a couple of years been on my mind and looking at the obstacles that the sport faces and how do I fit into that puzzle of is there a way to turn this into a mainstream sport?
Hmm.
And if there is, what's my role in it? And so that's kind of what I think about a lot. Um, and as far as doing, obviously, I do a lot of stuff within the industry, but I think ultimately what I'm doing in the industry will probably change to kind of better suit the goal of how does triathlon grow?
Hmm.
Because I think we can look at the numbers all day long and we can definitively say if it's trending positively or negatively, but it's still a very niche sport. And so it's like, how do you take it to that next level?
Hmm.
And so that I think is kind of what's keeping me interested in all things triathlon,
Hmm.
and not just the training and racing part, but You know, how does it grow? Is it more races? Is it more involvement? What what do we consider, a success or a step in that direction? And I think there's a lot of different ways to answer that or think about it. But then it's, what can I do and what do I see and making those changes.
Hmm. Well, you and Devin, obviously, with the coaching collective that you guys have going on, like there's seems to be a lot of effort that you guys put into that to not only grow that business but also create more awareness for the sport. Would you say that that's kind of the catalyst that will, or hopefully to be the catalyst for to create that change and growth?
Yeah, it definitely could be. Um, it's tough because like when I look at like how does a sport grow or what's considered, growth in a sport, and is it participation numbers? And so can we directly help that on a very small scale? Yes, from a local standpoint, right? We're helping bring new people into the sport, teaching them, training methods and getting them to go race. So
Hmm.
there's that, and yeah, we could make an impact there. You look at it from the professional side and the racing side. Probably not going to make a huge impact there. There's a lot of major players that have been doing this at a very high level and didn't jump into the sport as a overweight 25-year-old.
Yeah.
So I'm realistic there, and I get kind of the growth and the value of racing and kind of personal benefit, but not necessarily seeing that as a long-term career,
Mm.
or somewhere where I'm going to make a massive splash. That's kind of personal development is how I look at the racing side for me. Um, but you also look at, how do you increase viewership and the entertainment side of the sport, and that's something I'm super interested in as well. And I think that kind of coincides directly with professional racing because that's what people are watching. Most people
Hmm.
aren't turning into watch the finish line of an Ironman for 12 hours straight. They want to see
Yeah,
what's
they're just
going
looking
on.
for their person, and yeah, the professional side is definitely a bit more interesting.
Yeah. And so I look at that and then I look at it from a product perspective and how do we lower the barriers to entry to the sport? Because I think that's how you also directly influence participation.
Mm.
And I look at triathlon as being a very expensive sport to get into, especially on the bike side.
Yeah.
I think that's just because that's where I spend most of my days and a lot of my attention is within the bike industry. Um, and so then I look at, how do you get more people into the sport. And I think a lot of people think about needing to have a tri bike to do triathlon
Hmm.
and that's going to be a hard one to overcome. And so then we look at, okay, well, how much does it cost to buy a tri bike? And we look at that and it's, $3,500 to $4,000. And it's like, why doesn't a $1,500 tri bike exist? And I'm sure someone has an answer to that, but I think there's also a way to, lower the barrier to entry to get more participation. And so that's a lot what I think about right now is, how do you directly influence participation in triathlon?
Mm. Interesting. On the bike conversation, there's quite a few brands that do kind of the direct to consumer and try to keep it low ish. I think of A2 and obviously Canyon, although Canyon's becoming more and more of like a high end. They do
Yeah,
direct to consumer still, but they're still very high end.
they have a lot of
But
premium offerings
yeah.
and great price points, but you're still talking about a four thousand
Oh
dollar,
yeah,
three thousand
easily.
dollar tri bike, and
Yeah.
there's not an alloy tri bike on the market.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's going to be a rougher ride, but if that gets you into a starter bike and gets you to do your first local sprint, I mean, I think that's a win.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, I've one if had a lot of cash to go after something, it would be awesome to start a bike brand that has some of those lower end options and but go and buy like all the component companies as well and then bring them all in under one hat roof so you don't have to have all these layered,
Sure.
like pricing models to be able to make sure that people make their money because like if you could bring them all under one roof, I think that that's one way you could make it happen, but
Yeah, and I think just cool starter packs. I mean, and I see this because, our sales process at the shop I work at starts with a bike fit.
Mhm.
We don't sell a bike without doing a bike fit,
Oh well.
um, which is a little unique. But, you get in there and you open the conversation and you find out that most of these people, they've got a laundry list of stuff they have to buy, and they don't exactly know everything they need to buy. And so it's like for X amount of money, the starter pack like gets you into the sport. I think it removes a lot of the mystery around it
Yeah, like
because,
how to do it.
yeah, I mean, I get people that come in all day long and don't understand the difference between a wetsuit and a swim skin and why they need one.
Mm,
'Cause they've never swam in open water before.
yeah.
And so maybe there's an education component to growing the sport as well, but I think now we're getting in the weeds a little bit. Um,
No, I dig it. So, have you heard of the company Bicycle?
yep, yeah, I actually just sold 2 bikes on Bicycle.
Oh, nice. What was your experience like?
It's so easy. Minus there was some difficulties on one of the bikes I sold because I went to Canada and we got to play with customs for 2 weeks, and then there was some damage. But as far as it goes, I mean, both people got their bikes. I got paid on both, and after a couple emails, everything was resolved. So,
Nice.
I mean, I had a positive experience selling. I haven't bought anything on Bicycle yet,
Okay.
but yeah, it's a bike specific eBay, I guess, and the fees are
Hmm.
very reasonable. So
The reason I ask is because they reached out about a week ago and they were interested in sponsoring some episodes. And I haven't done any paid sponsors for any episodes yet, but I've heard really good stuff about that. So that's why I was kind of asking to see what
yeah,
your thoughts were, because I wouldn't want to support something that I obviously am not into. But all my interactions have been great so far, and then I've heard Pro Tri News is starting a sponsorship with them potentially. Hopefully that's not.
yeah. I mean, so honestly, that's how I found out about Bicycle is through Pro Tri News.
Oh,
I'd
really?
seen
Nice.
they had something, and so I was like, oh, and clicked on it and realized it was kind of looked like a pros closet kind of deal.
Yeah,
And
Bros Closet's now gone. I wonder if they like shut them
yeah,
down.
so I've heard they were gone, and then they got revamped, and so I went on their website and it looked like they were live, but they had no bikes, and
Oh, really?
so yeah. So I don't know if they're just kind of trying to restock a bit, or if they truly are gone. I think Bicycle's model works out a little bit better because they're essentially just an escrow and a listing company, and they don't have to
Hmm.
actually put hands on every
Yeah.
single bike like Pros Closet does. That
Yeah.
seems really tricky.
Yeah. No, it is.
Just
Yeah.
having shipped a number of bikes personally and through the shop, like having to do that multiple ways and have someone, I don't know, it just seems like a lot, but
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah. So, well, now the listeners know that I may be considering that ad. So if they hear one in the future,
I was
go
about to
click it.
say,
Go
drop it
click
in.
everything. Yeah. I could probably plug it in this episode. So I want to shift gears a little bit. On the topic of adversity. So when you first got into this sport, you were doing it for a little while, and then I was informed, and I think you even told me too, and I forgot. But you went through a pretty crazy time where you were involved in a crash.
Yeah,
Um,
actually, we can talk about that now because that is
yeah.
all settled.
Oh, there was like lawsuits involved.
Oh yeah.
Holy cow! Yeah, give me the long version.
Yeah. So 2022, I had just done Kona for the first time, and I was sitting on the beach next to Devin, and I was like, I want to do one more Ironman this year. And she was like, well, go for it. Texas or Florida's probably the only one that makes sense, which was like 3 weeks later.
December. Yeah. Oh
And so I
wow.
was like, yeah, screw it. Let's go do Ironman Florida. Because I really wanted to race. Kona didn't really go that well for me. Um, so we got home and signed up for Florida, and then went down there, and the swim went well, and then I was 45 or 50 miles into the bike and was coming through an intersection and got smacked by a car pretty good.
Hmm.
And I was leading the race at the time because there's no pro field. It was it my last race as an amateur? No, it was my second class race as an amateur. But yeah, I got hit by a car as I was kind of making a left hand turn. And what was crazy is I had Ironman escort was 100 yards up front. I had a police escort with me in front of me, and I think I had one behind me as well. Like I was well protected. And then just remember looking up at the sky and was clearly not attached to my bike anymore.
Holy cow!
Yeah.
They
And
like
I
turned
mean,
into you, or
yeah, so I was making a left-hand turn. They were coming from the left. If you read the police reports, there is mixed evidence of all sorts. Everyone saw something different.
Yeah, that's usually how it
But
goes.
basically, my front wheel and the front bumper collided. So it was one of those kind of split second, sideswipe events.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got ejected from my bike and ended up just basically landing on my back.
Mm.
And then got hauled off to the ER after the only thing I remember really about the ambulance ride is it took like an hour or an hour and a half because we were on the course just sitting behind everyone. And so me and the EMT got to spend a lot of quality time together. And then we went to the hospital, and luckily I was okay from I could move my feet, I could talk, like, I wasn't severely maimed, I had all my limbs.
Mm-hmm.
But then kind of started the next 2 year journey of my life of figuring out how to settle all of what had just happened. And so, contacted a couple lawyers. Bike Law was like honestly the first people to reach out because I think that was right after someone else had just gotten hit at St. George
Mm-hmm.
70.3. So it was like within 6 weeks. And so a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, this is Ironman's fault. This is their fault. And who knows? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whose fault it was at the end of the day. But got hit by a car and ended up with a broken hand, some messed up elbow, a lot of road rash.
The worst.
And then, the lasting thing was mostly just pretty severe PTSD because I've never really been in a bad bike wreck, definitely never anything involving a car.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just kind of learning how to trust again, maybe.
Yeah, I get relaxed. Every time hear a car, it's like you tense up.
Yep. Yeah, you just tense up. And I mean, for the people from Atlanta, they know how crazy drivers are here. But there's just a lot of unpredictability in our town. And so it, for the better part of 2 years kind of kept me off the road. And I remember even going for rides outside, like, talk about a 48-hour anxiety
Yeah.
induced panic attack. That's what I
Wow.
had every time I'd want to go ride outside. I'd be staring down the barrel of a 3 or 4 hour, 5 hour ride in Training Peaks and 2 days, and I'd go, oh my gosh, I have to do this outside. And so then I would find any excuse to not do it outside and do it
Wow.
inside on a trainer. And then you start to recognize that you're having those behaviors, and you realize that you've got to make a change because living in fear is no way to live.
Mm.
And so started working with a sports-based therapist who had kind of dealt with other people who had bike wrecks that were, for all intents and purposes, out of their control.
Mm-hmm.
And started working with him and had some good breakthroughs. And so we just kind of slowly but surely started learning how to ride outside again. But it was I mean, that happened in 2022. We finished and settled the case a month ago. So it's 2.5 years, 2 years and 4 months of kind of this lawsuit being held over my head, and that was no fun. And there's a lot of ups and downs, and dealing with that is something I hope no one ever has to deal with because it's not just like this happens and then they stroke you a check and everything's good.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of stuff that happens in between that's not fun.
What was the
And
most unfun part?
getting deposed is not fun. I don't know if you've ever had to do that, but
Is it
yeah,
like in a closed hearing situation?
yeah, basically, it's a bunch of people sitting at a table with cameras pointed towards you and people asking questions,
Trying to
and
trick you almost, yeah.
a little bit. It's what it seems like. Although I will say, like, of all the lawyers involved, everyone's a human being, and they're just trying to do their jobs at the end of the day, and
Mm-hmm.
so you have to kind of make peace with that. These people asking these questions and playing these gotcha games, like, you know, they're doing their job, and so that's, I think, what was hard for me is, like, I don't feel like what I was asking for is unreasonable. I don't feel like what they were asking for is unreasonable, but at the same time, we were still sitting on opposite sides of the table. And so I think there was a lot of stress around that as well.
Sure.
So
Yeah, I was gonna ask the breakthrough. Like you said, you were talking to like I guess a sports psychologist.
Yep.
I'm assuming it was with the type of therapy that you were doing. And if you don't mind me asking, was it something like EMDR type therapy for the PTSD situation, or what? I guess what brought about the breakthroughs, and like what were those for you to kind of move forward?
So for me, it was just playing the logic games. Like we didn't do any like brain spotting or any of that type of stuff. It was a lot of exposure therapy, hey, go walk up to the curb today. All right, go cross the street the next day. All right, go down the street the day after. I was taking these little baby steps and realizing like, okay, like there's always going to be unpredictability in life. And like
Mm-hmm.
at one point you were okay with that and almost embraced kind of the unknown. And then something completely out of your control happened and now you're not okay with that. And so it was learning to be comfortable again with that. And there's good days and bad days still for sure, but um, for him, he was like, think about every time you've been on a bike ride. And I was like, okay, I used to bike outside 3, 4 times a week, whatever it was. And he was like, how many times does something bad happen to you? I was like, well, like once. Uh, and he was like, okay, so do you think that the likelihood of that happening again is really high? And I was like, well, no, it's obviously always a possibility, but like for me, I have to think about things super logically. And so once like that kind of came through, then I was like, okay, like you're probably going to be okay this time. And you'll probably be okay the next time and the time after that. And then something will happen eventually, but like you can't live your life, you know, he basically said, if you're going to play the snow globe game, you have to be willing to, um, account for all possibilities. You can't just look at one consequence. You have to look at all the other things that could happen too. And so making that realization was very helpful for me and realizing like I was only catastrophizing the one bad option and not looking at all the other good stuff that could come from doing what I want to do.
Hmm. That lesson of essentially letting go of what you cannot control. Do you feel like that lesson was able to be carried through your other spheres of life?
I think that was the hardest part for me is I was always able to do that. And so it was only this one hang up in sport. Um,
Like previously, you kind of have always been able to let go of the things you
yeah,
can
and
control.
and even kind of during, we'll call it that time period, those 2 years, like I could still logically think about things and I could still let go of other parts of my life. But it was like anytime I looked at something with two wheels, it was like, that's going to end up bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and so for me, it was just, again, it was really weird because I was able to separate it in other parts of my life. But anytime I thought about a bike or having to ride outside,
Just like,
oh yeah, I was a mess.
yeah.
And so like, that did then spill into personal life and
Mm-hmm.
negatively affecting, Deb would be like, you're acting crazy right now. And she'd be like, you need to recenter and refocus. And so having someone who could also kind of call out and be like, hey, this is illogical. Like,
Mm-hmm.
come back down to earth, I think was really beneficial.
Yeah.
And having someone that I could lean on that hard.
Mm.
And that was probably my biggest takeaway from the whole thing is learning how to lean on other people,
Mm.
and going like, hey, I'm not okay. What do I do? And even just having a sounding board was something that I never really had to do before. And so I just didn't know that that was something I needed.
Yeah. Well, which makes sense. Like your personality, just from me knowing you a little bit, and obviously this conversation is like you seem to be a pretty relaxed, even keeled, chill guy. But these situations, it's yeah. I think it's such an important lesson to be learned that like that we can lean on others, or just like simply admitting the fact out loud, verbally to ourselves and whoever else is around that, oh, I'm not okay, but that is okay. Like not being okay is okay because again, it goes back to that sense of control. I remember a number of years ago I got held at gunpoint and like the thing that was like the worst for me wasn't even necessarily that like, oh, I got held at gunpoint or like that I had this terrible situation happen. It was this one like just visual frame in my mind where like I'm looking down the barrel of this guy's pistol as I'm sitting in my car, and I wasn't even upset like, oh, I could die. It was the fact that he had the
All the power.
control, yeah, to take my life if he wanted to. The fact that like there was nothing I could do to control that situation was so difficult for me.
Yeah.
It's yeah, like whenever we can't control something, and I don't know where that comes from. There's like this, we all just crave, at least men, too.
Oh,
I'm
I
thinking more
mean,
specifically.
yeah. I shoot, I'm slamming on my imaginary brake in traffic when Dev's driving half the time. It's right, like, and I know she's not gonna hit anyone.
Yeah,
I've been riding in the car with her for 5 years. Like, she hasn't hit anyone yet, but
yeah,
like, it's still like, oh, I can't hit the brake right when I want to hit it is
yeah.
like really hard to overcome.
Mm,
And so there's still probably a bit of that wanting to control hidden somewhere.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, yeah, it's interesting. It's something I think that we constantly all will have to battle. Um, I don't know if there's a place that I could come to personally where like I completely just am at peace with all situations, knowing that I don't have control. It's freeing in like sport. I mean, but it's easier to do because you're like, oh well, however I feel the day, I'm going to do the best I can do, and you can be done with it. But the stuff when like lives are on the line, that becomes a bit more difficult. 100%.
So
So let me ask you this question. So you you're a professional triathlete now.
yeah.
So the obvious pieces of success there could be, you winning a certain race and doing all these other things. But for you as an individual, from the time when you, I guess, even going back to when you first started competitively swimming and going throughout your triathlon career now, like how has your definition of success changed?
Um, s- like, so growing up was always results driven. Like, that was if you were successful, if you were fast. And so that was, I think, my initial approach with triathlon was like, if I don't do this, then this can't happen. And probably took me until 2 years ago to realize that that's not a great way for me to measure success against myself. Comparison is the thief of joy. That comes to
Mm,
a lot. And so when I measure myself against, results at this point, you're measuring it against, people that spend a lot of time doing this and have spent a lot of time doing this and that are very talented and probably more talented than I, or better working or whatever you want to call it, right? And like, I'm racing against people that do this as a career now. And so measuring myself against them probably isn't going to give me that feeling of success anymore. And so it's now me against me. And I realized that probably a year ago when I deleted Strava off my phone and was measuring myself against other people, even people that didn't know me. And I was like, I found that I was being really unhealthy with myself.
mm,
And that, I didn't consider myself a success unless I pushed more power than this person who knew that I wasn't even, who they didn't even know that I was looking at their Strava and comparing my workouts against theirs. But like, that's that trap I fell into. And so I had to kind of take a step back and go, well, what is success? And I was like, well, success is elevated performance after elevated performance, and comparing that against myself. So I think that's how I look at it now is, how did I run or how did I swim or how did I bike relative to the last race I did and in similar conditions? I mean, there's ways we could, break it apart all day long, but as,
mm.
did I bike more power? Did I run faster? So I still use, I guess, performance, but it's performance against myself and not against others.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's really hard, at least for me, to accept the fact that so from doing gymnastics when I was younger, I had like this, big upswing when you're first getting into something. Like you're learning a ton, you're excelling really quickly, and then there's like
Yeah.
this plateau moment, and then sometimes there's even a little bit of a dip, and the trajectory of performance over time, you can plot it the points, and there's kind of always a consistency, even though it does slow down. But like in the business world, for me, it's very easy to accept, at least it is now, that like the path is so all over the place. Sometimes it looks like you're completely failing, and then last second, you're almost out of breath or out of cash, and then like you can make it. So like that happens. But in sport, it's so much harder for me to accept because like when I look at, like I was saying, overall, all of the over the years and the performances, because I keep track to meticulous detail, like times and heart rates and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh yeah, I can see the trajectory. But whenever there's like a plateau or something, it's so hard for me to accept that like, oh, I'm still progressing, because sometimes it doesn't look
Sure.
like in the results that I am progressing, but sometimes in just feeling it is. So how do you measure feeling? It's like that's impossible to do. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, as long as I'm still enjoying it, then there's success right there. Like
Yep.
I'm doing something that, Robert in his early 20s would have never dreamed of doing,
Mm-hmm.
I was more concerned about, how many beers can I drink on a Friday evening, when I was 23.
Yeah.
And so the fact that like that's not my Friday afternoon or Friday evening or both, honestly, it's like that's success. And so it's like, is triathlon leading me down a healthier life, and is it allowing me to be a better partner? Is it, there's that method of success that I also measure. And so I'd say right now triathlon is allowing me to be successful personally.
Hmm. So are you a believer in like a higher power?
Yeah, 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 for sure.
Why?
It answers a lot of the hard questions I don't know the answers to.
Yeah.
Um, that's a good question. I don't know. I think I was raised with it. It's always kind of it's always been a part of my life. And I think there's just some unexplainable things in this world,
Hmm.
For a lot of things we can find a reason that this happened. There's a cause and effect for a lot of things. But then for other things, I mean, why did I get hit by a car? And also why did I survive getting hit by a car? And I'm never going to have the answer to that. But someone does have that answer, and they knew that I needed to still wake up and continue to live and breathe. And so I think for me, that's why I believe in higher power, because there's just some unexplainable things in this world that we don't necessarily need the answers to, but someone does.
Hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting answer. The way you said that reminded me kind of going back to the control aspect of things, because I think that uh, this is kind of anecdotal and it's an opinion, so nobody take this for absolute truth. But I would argue, or at least try to build a case, that those who are not even necessarily atheists, but those who don't believe in a higher power, it's out of a desire to be able to explain every situation, which is what science aims to do. And I don't even think necessarily that the concepts of creation or God are foreign to that of most scientific understanding. But I think that there is a lot of peace that can be had and afforded whenever we accept that, well, I'm not going to be able to understand everything.
Yeah. And I'm
Because,
not going to try to either.
yeah.
I mean, for me, I've realized I'll stay up way too many nights in a row if I try and explain the unexplainable sometimes.
Hmm.
And I've done that. And I've wasted a lot of energy on that. And then at the end of the day, I understand that they're gonna let be what's gonna be, and I'm just along for the ride.
Hmm. What gives you like that ability to recenter? Because you said that Devin, her being your sounding board at times, she's like, "Hey, you're being this way. Time to recenter." Like, what is it that you do practically that helps you find that peace and to get back to a healthy
I think I
place?
normally just try and find the comedy and things.
Okay.
I mean, I've never tried to take life too seriously, because we only get one of them, and we only get so much time, and being pent up or on edge all the time is just not how I want to live my life. And so when I find myself going to some dark place, it's like, okay, like there's something funny about this. Like, why am I getting to this point? And it's normally something very stupid. And so then when I can look at whatever is causing me to be off center and go, okay, well, that's pretty funny. It allows me to downplay, I think, the things that I am over exaggerating in my head.
Hmm.
Uh, so for me, it's just what's the more lighthearted approach to what I'm
Mm-hmm.
feeling right now? And normally it's comedy.
Mm. Yeah, putting words to the things that are going on inside our minds, like you said, they get built up. It's funny to me how I have sometimes had things rolling around in here, and then I write it down or even say it out loud, and then I realize like, wait, that doesn't sound right, or that doesn't seem as big as I thought it was.
100%. I mean, I'm sometimes I'm ready to burn the world down, and I'm like, someone just ran a red light. Like it's no big deal. Like
Hmm.
you
Yeah,
know,
a little
well,
road rage, Robert.
yeah, yeah. You've driven in this town. You know
Yeah.
what we have to deal with on a daily basis.
Oh yeah, man. What is the interstate that goes up from Atlanta to Chattanooga? I've done that so many times, and it's just amazing. As soon as you hit the Georgia line, it's like everyone's doing 90 miles an hour,
Oh yeah.
and yeah, I've seen some crazy wrecks too. It's like cars going up on the side of the wall, and it's just like, what in the world is happening?
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah,
Atlanta's not a real place. And I'm reminded of that daily, but mostly when I'm driving to and from work, I
yeah,
just realize that everyone is in their own world,
yeah.
doing their own things.
Doing their own thing, rolling the dice every time. So, oh man, I had a really good question, and I forgot what I was going to ask. It was like an in question. Bear with me. What was it? It's totally lost me.
Hope
Or
it
I've,
comes back.
yeah, I hope it comes back too. If not, I have to text you after and put it in the show notes or something.
Was it about road
Um,
rage?
do what?
Was it about road rage?
No, it wasn't. It was something else with like control or future. I don't know, perspective, something like that. Anyway, I guess I'll ask you one more question then in this regard. For who Robert is today, 30 years old, probably got at least another good 60 years of life.
Shoot,
So
I hope
you've lived
so.
through, yeah, you've lived through essentially one third of that life, or give or take a little bit. What is something you think that, or that you would really like to be remembered for, like that maybe even be listed on your epitaph?
I think just honestly being someone who makes other people's days better. And how I do that could probably come from a multitude of different ways, but um, yeah, I just want to be known for making people smile. Because we're in this kind of crazy time period in life, and it seems like
Mm,
everyone's moving in a different direction, and no one's got time for anything, and there's just a lot of crazy out there, and I don't want to contribute to that craziness. I'd like to have people think that I left the world a brighter place. And if that's a better place, great. But uh, yeah, just to be known as someone who was not negative in this world and wants the best for people.
mm,
That's all I'm really here for.
yeah. That actually reminded me of the question I was going to ask you. Um, what do you think that Robert needs to be essentially the best that you can be? So to be that person, what is there anything else that you need?
Like $100 million
Yeah.
probably.
$100 million. So you can give away $10,000 a day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I need my partner to be happy. If Dev's happy, I'm happy, and I feel like we can
Happy
go
wife,
conquer
happy
the
life.
world. Um, I've realized now that I'm okay with a simple life, and as long as I've got Deb in my life and my family in my life, like we're in a good spot, and I don't want that to change. And so as long as that doesn't change for the worse, then that's what I need.
Mm, beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. Well, Robert, thank you so much for taking the time. Let me ask some questions of you and dive into your life a little bit more. Um, I appreciate you as an athlete and as a friend for letting me come down to Atlanta when I did and get to swim with you in Devon. That was actually one of the coolest. I'll just share the story really quick for those who are listening. I showed up super early. I had to take my wife to the airport at like 3 a.m. in Atlanta, so we were already up way early. And then I think I swam with you guys what, like 5 or 6 a.m.
It was dark.
It was dark, and it was on this rooftop pool that was lit, and there was like stars out. I was like, "This is crazy!" And you guys were kicking my butt, which was also great to suck wind and be able to see the stars. But that
It
was
just
that was really cool. So thanks for that experience.
it, you know we it was 32 degrees this morning, and we're swimming on that same rooftop pool.
Wow, that's cool.
And you know, right before we go out, I'm like, why are we doing this? And then we get in the water, and like I do that first 25 of backstroke, and I'm looking at the stars. I'm like, oh yeah, this is why, because this is way better than being in a chlorinated indoor pool
Oh,
with a
it's
bunch of
salt
people
water.
around. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
salt water, it's open air. There's never anyone up there. It's like our own little slice of paradise if you like swimming alone.
Mm-hmm.
And you get some pretty awesome sunrises up there. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty gnarly. I just really quick too, like living here in Northern California now, I have a pool that's 2 minutes from my house and it's saltwater and it's outdoor and yeah,
best.
it is the best. I never want to go back. Like
Yeah.
saltwater is the way to go. I cannot do chlorine anymore.
The salt water is the best. Outdoor pools. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's 10 degrees outside or 100 degrees outside. Let me swim outside.
Yeah, 100%. Well, Robert, again, thank you so much, man. I appreciate you taking the time.
I appreciate you inviting me on the show, and yeah, look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you so much to Robert for coming on the pod and letting me dive into who he is a bit and the things that he's gotten to go through, especially with that crazy lawsuit with being hit by a car, just some of the things he had to work through. If any of you guys have ever had any close calls with anything in life, you can know that that can be kind of debilitating when you're trying to work through that with the stuff that's out of our control. It can definitely be difficult. I know I've experienced it. And if you haven't been able to work through that yet, I would encourage you to go find somebody to help be able to talk through that. Maybe find some counseling of some sort. And if you made it to this point in the podcast, just want to say thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here. If you are on YouTube, if you could like, comment, subscribe, turn the notification bell, that will help us to continue to grow. And if you would do that also for the same things that you can do on the Spotify platforms, the Apple Podcast platforms, any of those, if you can drop a review or a comment or any of those things, it really does continue to help us grow. If you could also, if you're interested, check out the stupidquestions.show website and sign up for the newsletter. You can also check out the show notes. You can get connected with stuff that we got going on. I'm working on a few things that I can't announce quite yet, but hopefully we'll be able to soon. So thank you guys so much for being on here and listening to me jibber jabber with people. Really appreciate you being here. We'll catch you in the next one. Peace.